Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rockologist broadcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Jason Herndon, and with me is the creator of the Rockologist, Mr. Tom Shannon. How are you, Tom?
How's everybody doing? How's everybody doing? Special guest today on our very first broadcast of the Rockologist. Jason, you want to do the honors?
Well, the man that's with us today is he's known for playing in several amazing bands, the Vinnie Vincent Invasion. He played with Nelson. You played on the first Nitro record, right? So we've got drummer extraordinaire Mr. Bobby Rock with us.
Yeah.
What's up, guys?
Bobby, glad to have you.
Pleasure to be here, man. Pleasure to be here.
In case people don't know, Bobby's got a new book out. The Boy's Gonna Rock, and it's a very interesting read about Bobby's life, but specifically, mostly this time in Vinnie Vincent Invasion, which is a pretty interesting time for him. But so Bobby, tell our audience about you a little bit, buddy. How did you get to this great place in the world, being in so many bands?
I never stopped, man. That's all. I just never stopped. You know, that's it, man. You know, I always tell people that when somebody's a lifer at whatever creative endeavor they choose, that's it, man. You know, there's no, you can't not do it. And, you know, for me, I'd never forget that moment, you know, 10 years old, watching some neighborhood kids play drums along with some records. A kid named Cole Newberry jumped behind an old set of Rogers and played along with Black Sabbath Volume 4, Song 1, Side 1. That was it. Just in that moment, I thought I was going to be a baseball player professionally at 10 years old. No. At that moment, bang. And that was it, man. And I think most people who catch the bug like that, they can tell you about a moment similar. And for me, that was it, man. So it's just been a lot about, you know, perseverance, and I do it because I love it, and I frankly don't know what else to do at this point. You know?
Well, it almost, you know, I don't know. I think people set their own course in life, and sometimes it's almost inevitable what they're going to be doing. I mean, your dad's drum kit. Tell everybody about that. To me, I got cold chills when I read that.
Yeah, that was freaky. I always say the only sort of irrational financial decision my father ever made in his life was as a newlywed at 19 years old, struggling, you know, with obviously he and my mom just got married. He always wanted to play drums, so he bought this Ludwig drum kit, which I think was like $200-300 back then, you know, which was a crazy amount of money. And he tinkered around with it for like 6 months, and then shortly thereafter, bills and my sister and everything else came along and piled up. So he put them in their cases, but he never sold them, you know. And then some, I guess, 10 or so years later, when I decided, they were always I never had much interest in them. They were sitting around in their canvas cases up in the attic. When I had that moment, the Black Sabbath moment, I went home and said, "Dad, we got to pull these bitches out of," well, I didn't say that, but I said, "We got to pull these drums out of the cases and get this thing cooking." And he was like, "Well, you know, well, maybe if we put them out." They were just thinking about the smashing and banging around the house. So we set them up in the garage, and that was it. That was the first kit that I played. I played it for the next several years, and that was there was something I always thought that was very kismet about the fact that he decided to keep those drums for some reason. He could have sold them. He got the money back. He never even played them, you know. But intuitively, I don't know what it was. It was something cosmic where he said, "I need to hang on to these," you know.
Yeah.
And that was our first kit.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so interesting. And I have to tell you, parents of drummers, you know, John Humphrey's a good friend of ours as well, and drummer for Seether. And your parents just must be saints to put up with all that noise as they're learning, because it's noise at first, you know, before you get good at it. I don't know.
Right.
I would.
But even when you get good at it, it's noise, you know. My thing was, well, first of all, my mom was the one who had to take me all the way across town for drum lessons. Now, I grew up in Houston, Texas. There were, you know, drums teachers and all that, but there's a guy named Randy May, who my band director, Miss Mary Thompson, who I actually dedicated the book to because she was so influential in my life in so many ways. She said, "You got to study with this guy, Randy May. He's the best in town." But he was like, clear the fuck across town. So after school on every Tuesday or Wednesday, my mom would pick me up, drive all the way across town. We'd have the lesson, drive all the way back in traffic. And she did that for years, you know. And then later on down the road, as I started playing with bands, usually rehearsal is at the drummer's house because you got your kit already set up. It's easier to bring the amps over.
That's right.
So that's what it was, man. So Monday, Wednesday, Fridays from 7 to 10 or whatever it was, we would rehearse, and they had to listen to that. And eventually they allowed me to take my bedroom. When my sister got married and moved out, I took over her room and turned my bedroom into a drum studio, and we got those gray egg crates. You remember?
Yeah.
So we got carpet and the egg crates and put that all over the walls. It looked kind of like an insane asylum in the room, And it didn't do a lot. I mean, it sounded cool in the room, but it didn't do a lot for the volume. But it was, they dealt with that, and of course, not to mention all of the practicing that I would do on when I wasn't rehearsing with the band, and not to mention all of the pitter patter of the drum, the practice pad, digga 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 digga, the rubber. I'd have that. I just sit out there and watch TV with them some nights and just digga 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 digga, and they just dealt with it, So sainthood is imminent, I would say.
I would say so. And yeah, I didn't see us in there, Bobby. But were you in like the school band or anything? Did you do drums in that?
From the very beginning, man. Right when I got interested in drums and started taking trying to figure out how to play, I figured, wow, I can do something at school that involves hitting the drums, sure.
Yeah.
And that's when I first met my band director, and so I was always involved with school band, with school jazz band, private lessons. I started playing professionally at about 15,
Really?
Dances and sneaking into clubs and this kind of thing. And so I think I had a pretty well-rounded experience of, the hands-on, like educational kind of stuff, but then also the real world in the trenches, gigging and playing. A pretty good combination of those things,
Right. Who were your biggest influences? And Jason, jump in here, man. I'm just going to talk and let you jump in over me.
If it's smooth, I'm not interrupting.
I'll
So
jump in.
we're good.
Now, who were your biggest influences, Bobby?
I would say probably out of the gate, my two biggest were Tommy Aldridge and Ian Pace.
Yeah.
So of course, Ian Pace, Deep Purple, Made in Japan. That was like Highway Star. The drum solo he did on, I think it was The Mule. That was a big watermark. And then Tommy Aldridge back then was in a band called Black Oak, Arkansas, who many of you guys may remember. And he's a bad motherfucker. There was a song on that record called Up. The shit he was doing back then with double bass, like nobody was doing it. I always say, man, you can't play rock drums in any era without stealing from Tommy Aldridge, whether you like it or not,
Right.
So those are my two guys out of the gate. Of course, I love Bill Ward from Sabbath, Neil Smith from Alice Cooper's band. A little bit later, a couple years later, of course, Neil Peart. Impossible not to be influenced by him with the stuff he's doing with 2112, All the World's a Stage, all that. So I tried to, steal borrow from as many of the different guys as I could. And then a little bit later, I started getting into the more progressive, a lot of the jazz drummers, fusion drummers, the great Buddy Rich. A lot of these guys, as I got into 11th, 12th grade, I started studying a lot of more of those kind of styles as well.
Yeah.
So after high school, did you go on to study music? Didn't you go to Berkeley?
I did, yep. And here again, at the urgings of my band director, Mary Thompson, I had a scholarship to like a local community college. So I went to tell her about it. Oh wow, I'm going to be going to Alvin Community College in the music program. And she said, why? She goes, because I think she saw my drive, she said, Berkeley is the best. You should go to Berkeley. Now this was, I just graduated. And so we're 3 months away from the first semester. So I go, well, is it too late to apply? I guess I could, so just in kind of a last minute thing, I went to Boston. I visited the school, fell in love with the place, submitted the application, went through the process very quickly. Boom, started in the fall right after I graduated, did 2 years at Berkeley, and that was a life-altering experience for me.
Wow.
Had you realized you had that kind of talent before she had that moment with you?
I was kind of a fanatical practicer. I had, a lot of folks in my inner circle that encouraged me. I felt like, I could play. So I don't know. I'll tell you, whatever I thought I was before I went to Berkeley, that changed as soon as I got to Berkeley, because Berkeley is like a bunch of where everybody's the big fish in the small pond where they're from. Now you go to a place like that, you got some of the best drummers from around the world there. And so, and either, you stay one semester, get discouraged, and go back to your small pond,
Right.
or you get pretty fanatical and try to play catch up. And that was the route that I chose.
Yeah. And here, I'm sorry. Let me add this, Jason. I'll jump out real quick. Hey, here's something I've noticed, Bobby, in life in general. A Hall of Fame baseball player was the greatest player on his single A team as well.
Right.
Not every best single A player ends up being a Hall of Fame player, but everybody can come from anywhere, and it's a testament to you and to her that she pushed you that direction. Go ahead, Jason.
I was going to just, out of my own curiosity, what years were you in Berkeley? What years would that be?
It would have been 81 and 82.
Did you cross paths with anyone that ended up being in the public eye? Because obviously the guys from Dream Theater went to Berkeley. There's lots of schooled guys from that.
So yeah, Portnoy and the Dream Theater guys, I believe were there a couple years after I was there.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Right. Meanwhile, I think Steve Smith, who's a bad motherfucker,
yes, for sure.
Beyond what he's done with Journey, he was there, I want to say, several years prior, maybe more mid-70s range. During my third semester was Will Calhoun's first semester.
No kidding, Living Color. So
Living Color, yeah.
Fantastic.
He's a bad boy too.
He is amazing. So.
And he was a badass back then. So, and I'm sure there are other guys. Zorro, he's known as like an R&B type drummer. He played with Lenny Kravitz, and he was there. He showed up at the same time I did, I think. And there's been a lot of other guys who've gone out, maybe lesser known, but who have earned a living playing, doing different things, doing studio work, this kind of thing. So.
Right. Yeah.
So as you were toiling away in Berkeley, did you imagine one day you'd be on stage, Aqua netted up, and?
No, and this, not at all. And this is a funny, one of the little diversions that I talk about in the book that most people don't know about is, I started out as a metalhead, again, Black Sabbath, Alice Cooper, Deep Purple, all those bands. And then in 11th, 12th grade, as I mentioned, when I got into more of the jazz guys, I really took a hard right turn around that time. In the summer after I graduated in particular, I really became immersed in that kind of music. Mm-hmm. And although I've had long hair since I was 13, so that was always kind of a permanent fixture, having the long hair. But I actually, by the time I got to Berkeley, I had kind of converted into almost, I hate to say it, but like a jazz snob. I had like a small Gretsch jazz kit with one of those 18-inch kick drums. Like I have tom-toms that are bigger than that fucking bass drum. But it was like, that was the style, that was the vibe. So when I was at Berkeley, if I'm being honest, I really kind of turned my nose up at rock music for several years there. And I was completely immersed in all of the technical stuff, the jazz, the Latin stuff, the kind of drumming where each limb does something completely independent from the other. I mean, this is the kind of stuff I practice 6, 7, 8 hours a day, every day there, And I thought I was going to be heading more in that direction, even with the long hair, So I'd heard about, I think Motley was just coming out, Iron Maiden was just coming out. I kind of knew what was happening in the scene, but I wasn't interested in it, to be honest. And so the long story short here is, when I got out of Berkeley, I started my own kind of like jazz band out of Houston. And one night at a show, and this is another freaky thing about the timing, is I had the band I was in were all students that I knew from Berkeley. So they literally just came to Houston and lived with me at my parents' house. And we would go out in my brown van and play shows around the region and that kind of thing. On the night of the debut of the Lick It Up video, it was a Sunday night, and we were playing this jazz club called Birdwatchers. So I actually, in the book, I describe how I'm putting on my tie, right, because I'm going to a jazz gig. And for the first time realizing that, wow, Kiss doesn't have makeup on? What's going on? I didn't even know anything about it. I didn't know who Vinnie. I go, is that Ace? That's not Ace. Who's that guitar player? I knew nothing about anything. That night, this is freaky. I didn't make the connection here till later, but that night, I go to the jazz gig, and one of the waitresses there was let's just say it wasn't a particularly busy night. So the waitress had this new thing called a video camera, video recorder. So she was on stage filming us playing, and I did a drum solo, and she filmed some of my drum solo on this video camera. So after the set, I see her over by the bartender, showing they were watching something. So I wandered over there. What's that? And she goes, "Oh my God, how do you do this?" I go, "Do what?" She goes, it looks like the tape was speeding up when you're playing. You're playing so fast, it looked like the tape was speeding up." So she had this, of course the screen is like, this big. She puts it up for me to check it out. And I watched myself playing. I went, "Oh shit, I'd never seen myself on video before. That technology wasn't really around." I said, "Wow, kind of cool. All this technique is paying off." It looked like they sped the tape up. And then I watched a little more of the video when the band came back in, and I realized that everything I was doing was like right here in the wrists. It was all wrist. It was cool. It was technical, but there wasn't like that, that fire. There wasn't any real fire in my playing. And that was the first time I realized it. Now, 6 months prior, I had actually auditioned for Jim Dandy, of all people.
Huh.
Jim Dandy, you guys know from Black Oak, Arkansas, he was actually ahead of the curve before David Lee Roth in putting together a smoking ass band. Remember how on David's first record he got Steve Vai and Greg Bissonette and Billy Sheehan. Jim Dandy was doing that in the late 70s, early 80s. He had like this band of gunslingers doing this almost fusion-y kind of shit mixed in with his Black Oak stuff. So I had seen his band some months prior, thought, wow, these guys can really play. This is kind of cool. And I had a chance to actually audition for them, and fucked the audition all up. I thought I was going to go a jazz snob. I'll go in there and blow, this is easy rock shit. No, and what I found out later is that Jim didn't think I played aggressively enough. Bobby rock, not aggressive enough. What the fuck? And of course, so I didn't understand what he meant. But when I saw the video, I had another moment like, wow, that's what Jim Dandy was talking about. This is what I'm seeing. I need to get back and start playing some rock stuff just to get some of this back in my playing again. I got all this shit now. Now I need to get some of this back in my playing. And that's what, and that inciting, event, the night of the Lick It Up video on MTV, had no connection. I didn't make this connection until years later. Yeah. That's what sent me back to the club circuit, back playing the cover tunes, back in the into what ultimately led to the Vinnie Vincent audition. So again, crazy timing stuff.
Yeah, but clearly that time immersed in the jazz part of it has had an impact on you. I mean, it's
right. Yes. And I just got to point out the double irony in all of this is that when I finally kind of went full circle back into the rock scene, talked my way into a Vinnie Vincent Invasion audition, went out to LA and actually did the audition for the guys, it was a lot of that kind of stuff. It was as been pretty well documented at this point. It was a screening audition where I wasn't actually jamming with Vinnie, Dana, and Robert. They were just sitting down watching a bunch of drummers come in and play for 10 minutes. They were trying to weed out, the good ones from the bad ones so that they could then invite key guys back that they would jam with. So that 10-minute screening audition turned into a 45+ minute, display of drumming techniques, because I started fucking around and because what I like to do, I still like to do the rock stuff, but then throw in some of the other influences. Mm-hmm. That really caught their ear. Vinny especially, went nuts over that shit. Oh wow, what's that? Oh, do some more of that. Oh wow, they were fascinated with how a rock guy was doing a lot of the different technical stuff and all of that. So ironically, the excursion into the jazz and fusion stuff and the Berkeley thing and the jazz snobbery and all that actually played, I think, a key role in helping me to stand out from all the other guys at the audition, So yeah. Again, a weird, a complex web of circumstances there.
Yeah. So talk about how you got that audition, about that phone call. I like that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm out on the club circuit, and I always like to mention, I don't know if you guys recall, but, mid-'80s, this was one of the most vibrant times in America to be a working musician.
Sure.
Almost any major city you went to, there would be multiple clubs, 5 to 7 nights a week with live entertainment. And if you had a decent band that could play cover tunes and had a little bit of a show together, you could stay out on the road year round. A week in this city, then a week in that city, then a week back in this city, and you go around a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 state region. Now it's time to go back to where and you could just keep on looping around and around. 3, 4 sets a night. It was the crazy times, fun times, and everybody loved that live music. MTV was just starting to pop. It was a fantastic time. However, after close to, after the better part of 1985 being on the road doing it, I soon realized that, the band I'm in will never be able to get beyond this level.
Right.
It's a decent band. We can keep working. I can keep making my $150 a week and sleeping on the floor and eat peanut butter sandwiches and heat up the soup in a hot plate, as long as I want, but there's got to be a light at the end of the tunnel here. So there was another band on the circuit called Sweet Savage, and they were like they were like the big dogs. They were commanding the most money. They were doing headlining sets. They really had evolved after doing the circuit, and they had also been out to Los Angeles a couple times. They had, I believe, a smaller indie deal where a debut EP was about to come out. So I called their singer, this guy named Joey C. Jones, who's from Dallas. He's still out there doing it to this day. I still run into him. It's crazy. I called Joey. Hey, bro, we've met a couple times. We've been friendly. I said, man, listen, I want to make a move to L.A. Do you have any idea who I should call? Who might be able to direct me once I get out there? He goes, oh yeah, man, this guy Dana Strum just produced our record, and he's working with Vinnie Vincent, who has recently left Kiss. He's got his own deal, got his own band together, and they have everybody in place but a drummer. Here's Dana Strum's phone number. So now you got a 22-year-old kid from Houston, you're dialing the number, and I just got to leave it, hoping he's going to answer, but of course I get his machine. You got to leave a message, and this is old school machine, like the cassettes in the, the Radio Shack thing or whatever. So I left him this, rambling, verbose message about I heard about the audition, and I'm the best guy out there for the gig, and if they give me a chance, they're not going to find anybody, this kind of shit. And so Dana heard the message, and of course, Dana had a history, of course, with pairing Randy Rhoads with Ozzy. He knew you could find talent in unsuspecting places, so I don't think he was put off by the fact that who's this jerk-off from Houston that's calling me right now. I think he said, hey, okay, we don't know, maybe the guy could play. So Dana calls back, we have a conversation, and he agrees to let me come out on audition. So about 6 weeks later, I had to kind of be in limbo, unfortunately, but about 6 weeks later, we set it up, and I packed the old brown van with all the drums and headed west and had kind of a destined moment at the audition.
That's cool.
That's cool. Fascinating. So, do you recall anybody else that was called in for those auditions? That you were in the running against? Yeah,
there were a couple guys. I'll let them step forward if they they want. I will say this though. I stayed with my old college roommate from Berkeley. He was living in Hollywood at the time. I'd arranged to stay with him. He went with me to the audition and was kind of my drum tech guy that day. He helped me get the drum set up. When we pulled up, it was what you call a cattle call audition, meaning that it was just a bunch of guys there. So there were a bunch of drummers with their standing next to their drum sets, stacked up, ready to go in, set up real quick, and do their 10 minutes. So when it was my turn, I go in there, he helps me get set up. My boy waited outside, and I started playing. As I mentioned, it went 45 plus. When we opened the door at the end of the audition, everybody left except for one other drummer. They just split, and my friend said, the more you kept playing and the longer it kept going, people just started grabbing their shit and leaving.
That's awesome.
And I don't know if it was out of their just frustrating waiting or just hearing all the what the hell is he doing, like some kind of Latin fusion shit? I don't know what they were thinking, but everybody split except for one guy, and the remaining guy, as I say, looked like he was on his way to like a Holiday Inn top 40 gig or something. He didn't look like he was going to be a good fit. And as soon as he walked in, I think everybody kind of had the sense. And so I was pretty much hired on the spot, more or less. But anyway, that was it. And I'd heard in retrospect, certain guys came up to me who had been there earlier that day. Hey, Bobby, I did that audition also, that I didn't know until later, which was kind of interesting.
Fascinating. Yeah. Well, so you're in the band. What's going on at that point?
Complete elation initially, as you can imagine. You struggle through the years. You're dreaming about that big break. And the thing about this gig is that it had a little built-in celebrity to it because of Vinnie's background. So it wasn't like, oh, I just got this. I'm in this new LA band that has a record deal. I'm playing with ex-Kiss guitarist Vinnie Vincent. So initially, it was quite a hoot. I mean, I went back to Houston, and I was the local boy here comes home, and I interviewed with the local rags, and it was like this big thing, knowing that in about 6 weeks I'd head back to LA to do the record. And I'd been in the studio before. I'd done some recording, but I never recorded at a major label level like that before, at one of these big, multi-million-dollar facilities and all that. So it was kind of nerve-wracking. I didn't know what to expect. And then, of course, once we got in there, got the recording process underway, and it was time to record drums, that's when we kind of stepped into this whole other level of, let's just say, inadvertent psychosis in, how the drums were ultimately recorded, and why we, it ultimately took 3 trips back and forth to LA to get the drums the way Vinnie wanted them. Mm-hmm. And it was, PTSD, and it was kind of traumatic. And for a minute there, I thought, man, I was going to lose my job. But we ultimately got through it. And it was a hell of an experience to go through for your first time. I've never had anything remotely like that for all the records I've done, all the sessions I've done since. Nothing is arduous. And in a way, I'm glad it happened on my first time, because it was all downhill from there. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
So was there any, prior rehearsals, or did, how did all that come about? Did you just go in and, maybe have charted music or something? And, how did all of that come about? How did you get the songs down?
The record was done completely backwards from convention. Normally, what you would do is you would always track drums first,
right?
And the drummer would play with like a scratch guitar track and a click track. The click track is the metronomical reference point that pretty much from the early 80s and maybe probably even before, most records, many records have a click track on there. And then you would have, sometimes the guys might be jamming along with you in the studio just to get the live feel, but more often than not, you got a click track with a scratch guitar. You knock down drums first, then the bass player comes in, puts his part on there, then rhythm guitar, that kind of thing.
Right.
This was done completely ass backwards. And I think it was Dana Strum's call. He was co-producer. I think this is what he probably did with the Sweet Savage record and a few other ones. And you got to remember, this was at the very beginning of sort of like the new drum machine influenced kind of production,
right?
Which started with Pyromania. Meaning that the tracks were almost machine-like in their accuracy. The production became extremely polished. That was the watershed moment when Pyromania came out that really shifted. And of course, that what was it, 1984 had like the drum sounds on there with Van Halen. We were starting to see the production get very modernized and influenced by what was going on in the rest of the world, which was drum machine, drum machine, drum machine. Because remember, anytime you heard anything in the 70s, more or less, if it was a TV commercial, a movie soundtrack, any song on the radio, that was a real motherfucker playing drums.
Right.
Even in the disco era, the dance music of the day, is almost always a real drummer playing on those records. Now that was starting to shift. TV, film scores, TV music, Miami Vice, all that shit. Everything was, machines and sequencers. That was like the big thing now, and it was influencing how records were starting to be done. So what they decided to do was just use a drum machine as sort of like a point of reference and start by tracking rhythm guitar parts. So it was unorthodox, but what you had is Vinnie went first, and I was hanging at the studio, and I was absorbing. That's how I learned. Like, we never all got in a room with the drums and figured out drum parts.
That's what I was getting at. That's what I want. Yeah.
Right. We skipped over all that because the songs are kind of built up from the ground up with rhythm guitar and drum machine. After all of Vinnie's parts were done, Dana steps up, drops all the bass guitar parts on there. So when it was time to record drums, I was going to be playing along with click track, drum machine, rhythm guitar, bass guitar. So I figured my job would be to kind of, be the glue, because obviously we're going to take the machine out of there.
Right.
So the parts that I played had to kind of, mesh everything together. And so the idea was that, you would have the accuracy of, guitar and bass parts that were cut to perfectly in time to machine. But then when you bring the drums in there, it would give it a little more of a human feel. It would have to be dead on accurate, of course, but it would feel, of course, differently than a drum machine. So that was the theory. That was the concept. And so the parts were kind of developed as we were recording. So you had Vinnie and Dana, behind the console, and I would just start playing, and if they would just cut the tapes. Oh, you know what? Try a different fill there. Try this with your bass. We'd make the alterations, and I would just take passes through the song. And if I messed something up or they wanted to do something different, they would they do punch-ins, right? Where they could punch you in at a certain place. So as the second verse starts, bang. Because remember, this is all going to 2-inch tape now. None of this hard drive shit. None of this Pro Tools. This was actually, and if you punched back then, you were always risking fucking something up.
Right.
So and Dana was always the one to work the machine. We had a great engineer, Mikey Davis. He helped get sounds and all that. But when it was time to record, it was Dana Strum's index finger, on everybody. He recorded all of Vinnie's shit. He recorded all the vocals. He recorded all the drums, and he was incredible. He could punch in and out of places really tight, and so that was kind of like how we did it. And so the main issue the only thing I could really attribute to all of the sort of OCD-like attention that was given to the drums and their accuracy with the machine and all that, because I should point out that that's ultimately what happened. Like I would do a pass. Like the first song we did was on that first record was a song called "I Want to Be Your Victim." I just remember that was the first one we did. I remember the tune. We spent some time with it. Vinnie was very meticulous about how accurate the drums were to the machine. And finally we had the take. So they invited me. I was recording in this like gutted theater that was downstairs from the control room. I had to go through these like cubby hole to get down there and cross a plank and all kinds of shit. It was really like Spider-Man vibe to get down there. But so they invited me up and we listened to the track. Now when we listened to the track, they pulled the drum machine, the click and all that out of there. It's just listening to drums, bass, and guitar. And we listened, and this shit was off the fucking hook, man. I mean, it worked. I mean, it sounded like there was a band chemistry. It sounded like three badass motherfuckers just mowing the shit down live, but accurate. Sounded huge. The drum sounds, they had the natural ambience of the theater, and we were like, holy fuck. This is 1985, so after that, everybody started using the big cavernous drum rooms, and that big drum sound became. It was still kind of a novelty, so we were like, wow, listen to the drums, listen to the track, holy shit. We were like wetting ourselves over this thing, man. And so it was like, okay, cool. And I felt relieved. Okay, cool. We got one down, 1 down, 10 to go, whatever it was. And so then Vinnie wanted to listen back just one more time, just to make sure. Yeah, I know. I was like in the back. I didn't even sit up on the board at that point. I was in the back of the room, some water, just going like, oh man, this shit sounds killer. It's gonna work. Because I was still, you still have your trepidations. Am I gonna get fired? Am I gonna be good enough to do a session at this level? You still have your self doubts. That was gone. We were feeling good. And so to sort of listen to the track one more time, Vinnie decided just to make sure to just listen to drums and drum machine one more time, top to bottom, by themselves, And so what you're trying to do is get this kind of thing happening where the drum machine snare drum and my snare drum is exactly dead on, drum machine bass drum and my bass drum is exactly dead on throughout the entire track. And so what he wound up doing was putting my drums on one speaker, panned, the drum machine on another speaker, panned. So he could just be assured that there was absolute cohesion and accuracy with every single hit. Now, I got to point out, man, that the listener would never have that point of reference.
Nope.
No.
All the listener needs to be able to do is, bang their head when they're listening to it, feel a groove, which this shit had in spades, man. So when you listen, all of a sudden, like one of the snares, okay, was like just slightly off. You see what I'm saying? Like instead of like it was like this, and it made kind of like what they call a flam sound.
Flam sounds, yeah.
Yeah, where it's like a. You see how it's like I know it's hard to hear, but so wait. Now he goes right there. That snare, the third snare on the second verse, right there. We're like, what the fuck? And so Mikey, they rolled back the tape, play it, and sure enough, this one snare was off. Now, if you heard it again, if you take the machine out of there, play with the track, no one in a million years. And not only that, but every great record that we love, that we grew up with, like those Black Sabbath records, are you shitting me?
Yeah.
I mean, this shit pushed, it pulled, it did it. Even John Bonham, who's known for his vicious back-in-the-pocket grooves, he might push or pull. If you put a click up against there, you could see he'll put. But it's what we're used to hearing. But again, 1985, see, that was kind of shifting. It was shifting away from sounding like a live, real drummer and shifting towards this mechanical accuracy thing. So I think
you had to go back in there and punch in a snare hit.
That's exactly what happened. But then what happened is when Dana would punch me in. So now you're rolling the dice on two occasions. Number one, Dana's got to be able to make a clean punch, and those are not easy with drums because shit's ringing, cymbals are ringing, and all that. So he has to make a clean punch, and then I have to play with absolute accuracy. However number of bars he has to record before he punches out again.
Right.
You see? And the snare drum has to be tuned and sound the same. So if we're fixing something at the beginning of the tune, let's say, and by the end of the tune I'm beating the shit out of the thing and the snare drops in pitch just ever so slightly, you would never notice it. But if you got that snare drum sound and put it up in the, and try to replace the snare with it, oh shit, you got the punch, but you need to torque the snare up a little bit so it matches the other. Yeah, it was like a back alley abortion. Wow. At this point, man, just trying to be that exacting about all those things, and then maybe I would go in and play that one snare right, but then maybe two kick drums later, that bass drum might be a little off, Oh, okay, the snare, but now that kick drum's off. So now we had to go back in and punch this shit. So, and that became the way of the entire first round of drum tracks. Instead of knocking it all out in 3 or 4 days, it was several weeks. Just this arduous process of playing machines, analyzing that way. Did
it make you second guess wanting to even be in the band?
Never that.
Okay.
I always wanted to be in it, but it made me second guess whether they were gonna keep me. Right. I kept thinking like, oh man.
So, was this the first time? Because I'm gonna plead ignorance on this. Is this the first time really that Vinnie was the leader of a project like this, that he actually had say in stuff like this? I'm guessing it was.
That's a good question. There's no doubt that during, for example, the demoing process, and I know he was involved with other projects where he was in the band and of course demoing and stuff. I'm sure he did there, but now that you ask the question, I'll plead ignorance right there with you, because that's actually a good question. I don't know that there was another major album release that he did where he was in that kind of a role. So that's actually a point,
It's tough, and it's easy in hindsight now. Look at this, but it's almost like somebody had painted the Mona Lisa, and somebody wanted to photograph instead. You know what I'm saying? There's
exactly
in a masterpiece. Even Bohemian Rhapsody, I hear it every single time. There's a part in there where Freddie Mercury is just kind of getting a little bit off in his vocals. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying it's there.
Right.
And I'm glad it's there.
Right.
It's right. Life isn't perfect, but it's easy to say it now. They say that about the Eagles because. Of course, I think The Long Run was like one of the very first all-digital recordings, and they talk about that, about how, well, Joe Walsh does anyway, about how it just got maniacal, the way that they were having to perfect every single beat. So, well, the record turned out great regardless at the end of the day, right? I mean, it's...
What the Eagles record or the Vinnie Vincent?
No, your record. Vinnie Vincent. Yeah, Long Run did, Long Run. That was my favorite.
Right. Well, two things. First, the example you said about the Mona Lisa thing is exactly correct. And what's crazy about that record when you listen to it? Two things. Number one, it's a weird hybrid to me of sort of like this almost mechanical, like machine-like accuracy grooves when it's time to groove during the verses and the choruses.
Yeah.
But there are a number of really extravagant, adventurous drum fills. See, so that was the world that I feel like Vinnie was stuck between. Because remember, Vinnie is a musician's musician. He can play all different styles of music. Half the reason I got the gig was because of all the other crazy shit I could do. So he was anxious to incorporate like the fast fills and the double bass stuff and all the crazy chop stuff. He loved that. So on the one hand, that's a live drummer in a studio doing all the crazy shit. You can't program that stuff; it would sound ridiculous. So you got to have so. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, he liked the mechanical drum thing that was going on those Michael Jackson records and that whole kind of vibe. So it was like he was trying to reconcile these two different approaches And you're absolutely right. These are different schools of thought. Now, ironically, in the modern age with Pro Tools and digital recording and quantizing shit, there's something you guys are probably familiar with, something called a grid. So when you're recording digitally, there's a grid that sort of defines the metronomical points of a tune. In about 1 second, one push of a button, you can take a drum track and snap everything to a grid. So if the kick drum's pushing or pulling here or there, not that you would want to do it in my opinion, but that's what guys do. Right. The drummer plays the track down top to bottom, quantize, bang. Now all of a sudden, shoop, everything that was off the grid, even a little bit, is now on the grid, and you play it back and it's perfect. And so you could have a live drummer playing, let him do his drum fills, how he's going to do it, and pick which parts of the track you want to have quantized and which ones you don't. We would have that Vinnie Vincent record done in 3 fucking days with that technology, because all I had to do, I could play the track down a few times, we pick our favorite take, he goes in, and if he doesn't, he could quantize the shit out of all the verse parts or the chorus parts that had the grooves, lay off of it, let me do my fills. So that's kind of like, we had kind of like the, the trailer park version of that, with what we wound up with, kind of weird mishmash of shit punched together during the verses and these crazy fills in there. But the other thing, when you asked, did the record turn out good, the biggest irony of the whole thing was how low in the mix the drums wound up being. Now, if you listen nowadays on Spotify, or if you get one of the remastered 2003 versions of the CD, the remastering, I thought, brought the presence of the drums up notably from where the vinyl was and what it was like originally. But man, when those drums are, by the time they pushed all of the rhythm guitars as hot as they were and all the solo shit, those are kind of like in what we call competing frequencies with drums. And that range, that bandwidth, so to speak, something's got to give. If you want to crank the shit out of the drums, like you listen to the Zeppelin record, those Jimmy Page guitars, that's not a monstrous guitar tone going on there. It's a monstrous drum tone. But if you really listen to Jimmy Page's guitar, it sounds perfect for the band, of course, but it isn't like, it doesn't have like that, like a Black Sabbath kind of tone about it, Black Sabbath's drums don't sound like Led Zeppelin's either. So something has to give. And so no matter what those drums sounded like, when we pushed them and listened to them by themselves in the room and all that, as soon as you push all of that shit so hot in the mix, that was the irony. I'm going like, what? What the fuck? And then what was that fill again? I don't even remember what I played there. I mean, it was that kind of thing. So in my opinion, and I'm not saying this, well, hopefully I'm not saying it just because I'm the drummer. I've heard this feedback from many others. That was the biggest irony of the whole process here. All the shit we went through doing the thing 3 times, only to return on the 3rd time to more of a traditional, let the guy play the track down from top to bottom, make a couple fixes, and move on. Ultimately, it was all so squelched in the mix that it didn't matter anyway.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. Ultimate irony. Ultimate example of irony.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you got the record. So you've got the record finished now, and I guess your natural thought is, well, we're going to go tour this, and then you've got Robert Fleischman on the tour. So what's the inner dynamic going on there?
Well, Robert was always very disconnected from the project while I was involved, quite frankly. I mean, I've always liked Robert. He's cool. We got along well. He was probably my biggest proponent at the audition. He was the guy I felt the most warmth from, if you will, at the audition. He said, man, you sound fucking great. Unless somebody comes in here with 3 arms, you got the gig. I mean, this kind of vibe. But that was it. When I went back to record, I just didn't see him around much. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I talked about in the book was I was the new guy, so I didn't ask many questions, but I would always I'd overhear conversations of, Vinnie being on the phone with Robert, or Dana on the phone with Robert. Like they were trying to convince him to do this or do that, or you're going to come tour with us, right? This kind of thing. So I got a sense that, I don't know how interested Robert is in doing this gig. And so he came down literally I saw him at the studio a couple times while I was there during the guitar, bass, drums process. And then by the time he went to do vocals and my drums were done, I was back in Houston. So I missed him throughout the entire recording experience until we did that first photo session. Now that was the time, you asked about inner dynamics, that was the time that we were all in a room together, the 4 of us, and you really feel the divide conceptually with what was going on, especially with this look thing,
Look at the hair. Look at the hair.
All of that. Robert was not into this drag queen vibe. Wow. He just, you know, I think his feeling was, you know, this is a great record. We're all respectable musicians. We can all play. We're not a bunch of posers. He felt like if he had to go to that extreme to do all the shit with the hair and the makeup, that maybe you couldn't. Back then, we had the term poser was something you would throw out. You know, we're not a bunch of posers. We don't need to do all this. As we were chasing a trend. In retrospect, he actually had a pretty, I think, realistic view of it. You know, it probably would have made more sense for Vinnie to stick with his quote unquote brand as people knew him during the last days of Kiss. Have more of a Def Leppard kind of look, where they look like rock guys but not crazy over the top. That probably would have served us better, given the musicianship and the kind of record it was, etc. But man, so that was we knew there were tensions there, and of course, what I would find out much later was that, you know, besides the fact that Robert had a lot of other interests, that he would have needed a certain amount of money to tour with, and that he was not going to sign this. I think he was kind of being forced to sign a management contract that he didn't want to sign. That's ultimately what did it. All those things aside, I think one of the reasons that Robert was put off by the whole thing was that when he worked with Vinnie on, I call them the big three, the 3 songs that got Vinnie the deal: Boys Gonna Rock, Shoot You Full of Love, No Substitute. Those 3 songs in that order as they appear on the first record. That was on the cassette tape that was handed over to Chrysalis Records by manager George Sewitt that locked in the deal. Before that meeting took place, Robert, I believe, was under the impression that this was a collaboration, that this was their band, you know?
Gotcha.
And so Robert came in, he sang on the tunes under that premise. Then he gets a deal, it's a solo deal. After the fact, hey, Robert, guess what? I have a deal now. You want to sing on the record? He's like, well, you have a deal. What contract? I haven't seen any contract.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Wow.
you know. So, and I think at that point, bang.
Wow.
He never really recovered from that. Betrayal's probably a strong word, but that's the impression I got. Like, hey, you know what, man? Fuck this project. That's kind of like what I felt. So ultimately, he was convinced to come back and sing on the record, but I think it was gonna take quite a bit for him to want to, you know, do the thing full time, go on the road. You know, plus he was, you know, I think he was doing a lot with publishing. He was used to making real money, and I don't know what he would have wanted weekly or whatever. That I never knew any of that. But the deal breaker was the fact that they were really trying to get him to sign this paperwork that he was not going to sign.
Yeah, I always thought it was kind of ironic. Well, I don't know if ironic's even the word. I like Robert Fleischman. And, you know, I mean, of course, I grew up, you know, like I was 17 in '77, if that helps kind of put things in perspective. And so I'm out here in the middle of Kentucky. We don't get a lot of information about the entertainment industry, you know. and so you know, here comes this Journey LP.
Right.
Just, oh my God, Wheel in the Sky, what an awesome song. And I am just tore up with that song. Yeah. And never really paid any attention to writing credits and all that, because, you know, clearly Robert Fleischman wrote that song. And then I don't know if you can see it back there, but I've got my Perfect Stranger LP sitting back there over my shoulder.
Oh wow.
That's one of my favorite albums ever. And I don't even know where I ever even found the damn thing. I just, you know, at that point I was just buying albums all the time.
Right.
And I got that thing, and I think somewhat I liked it a lot because the guy's got hair like I had at the time. You know, I had curly fro and natural movement, no perm. And I just liked it. I liked the vibe of it, and didn't find out till years later that the guy was right on the cusp with Journey before they broke. Now I don't know what the story is on that, but then to be right on the cusp. But it sounds like, you know, it was clearly not a direction he wanted to keep going with Vinnie Vincent Invasion. But how many opportunities do you get?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, and that takes, and actually I think a lot more of him because of the way you're describing this. Because it sounds like he made a conscious decision that, man, this just isn't the direction that I want to be going with my life. And it's really strange because, you know, the guy's a hell of a talent.
And that's the thing, and you know, that as far as I know, that is the only such record that Robert has done, like a hard rock album with that kind of singing. It's kind of an anomaly, I think, if you look at his body of work, and certainly what he would later go on to do with The Sky and some of the other things he's done. I just think he had just this freakish ability to belt that shit out, man.
Yeah.
And one of the things I talk about in the book is listening for the first time to some of Robert's vocal tracks on that record, soloed up in the studio. Hit the solo button, listen to the guy, no music, just listen to this guy sing, man. The fucking hair on my arms stood up, man. I mean, the way he sang, the combination of that soulful thing, the power behind his voice, the range, the effortlessness, all of that. I think he just had like a freakish ability to sing in that style. Of course, we know he could do other kinds as well. And that was it. But that was probably, I presume, like the only part of him or side of him that was truly like a real rock guy or a hard rock guy. And he had the ability to do it. But every other aspect of it, the clothing and probably the lifestyle stuff and so forth, I don't think it was really his cup of tea.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you're given a gift and it isn't really something that you want.
Right.
I mean, sometimes that's the truth. And I'm sure he's been very happy with his career and where he's gone and what he's done. So, I just thought it was interesting. It just once the moment hit me, and it was sometime after the Vinnie Vincent Invasion came out, and of course Mark had stepped in by that point.
Right.
And I'm like, wow, right at the cusp twice.
Right.
Yeah. So Mark,
Yeah.
how did Mark come in then? What's the timing on all that?
Well, I mean, I believe the record had been out, like a month or something? It was that early in the game when I get that fateful afternoon phone call from Dana Strum. And I mentioned anytime I'd hear from Dana Strum during the day, I knew something happened, something bad happened. Because usually he would call like late as fuck, like 11, 12, his time in LA, I'm on Central Time. That's when the calls from Dana Strum would come in. If it came in the afternoon, it was like literally, oh shit, what happened, So, and that was it. Robert just bailed, So we don't look at it in practice of really what it was. I mean, because Mark was such a smooth transition that went on, and there really wasn't much of a ripple in the activity. But at the time, man, you got to understand, man. Even though this was Vinnie's thing, the lead singer of the record, the voice of the record, just left. Yeah. That's major. It's not like the drummer left or the bass. The sound, the voice of the record split. So it was kind of a catastrophe. So we went in this big time search mode over the next couple of weeks, and a lot of guys were contacted. And interestingly, I think Lenny Wolf was one of. I'd heard that he was one of the early favorites. I don't know if
from Kingdom Come.
Right at the time, he
great
was
vocalist.
He was with Stone Fury.
Stone Fury, that's right. Yes, he's an incredible vocalist.
He's a badass.
Yeah.
He's a badass. But I don't know how far that got. If they approached him, or I just remember that was one of the names. There were other guys. There were a lot of guys. One of the funny things is there were a lot of guys who were kind of like on their way up. That would have been. In fact, I even referred. There's a guy named J.J. Steele who I toured with, or I worked with briefly prior to the Vinnie thing, who was like the prototypical frontman guy who could have stepped in and I thought done a good job. So they listened to his tape and they dug it. So what happens is Vinnie calls the guy on the phone and just wants him to sing right there on the phone. Boys are gonna rock. I mean, whatever, right there on the fucking phone. And so he's like, the kid didn't know what to say. He's like, well, okay, so he does it, and then 2 minutes later, the call comes to an abrupt end, and that was his audition.
Wow. And
he did that, as I understood it, several with other guys, So you wonder, in retrospect, who did he talk to that who got that kind of a shot at it? But for whatever reason, I know Mark Slaughter had a more legitimate shot at it. I think he knew Dana. Maybe Dana had hired him for some background vocal stuff. Like Dana had some relationship with Mark at the time, so he ensured. He goes, okay, here's a young kid from Las Vegas. He's got a throat of steel. He can sing all this shit. He's got the range. He's 21. Looks great. Let's give him a shot. So he actually was one of the few guys who had a chance to go in and demo some stuff up to the tracks in the studio. And it was really, I think with Mark, because Mark wasn't Vinnie's favorite. Let's just put it that way. I think, especially compared to Robert, Fleischman had 10 years on Mark in terms of just experience.
Right.
Look, you hear that. You hear the subtleties of a seasoned vocalist who's been in the trenches, who's toured, who's been in the studio, who's done all that. His voice is more developed, all of that. So I think that was an issue out of the gate. But just as a matter of timing and practicality, it's like, here's a kid in Vegas. He could be out here tomorrow. We're ready to roll. We're ready to do the Boys Are Gonna Rock video, photo shoots, boom, boom, bang. The Alice Cooper tour is upon us. And this was a quick fix in an emergency moment. So I think Vinnie agreed to move forward with Mark as much a part of. I mean, he knew the guy could sing, but I think he had his issues with him, and some of those issues would surface at least throughout the Alice Cooper tour. Once we hit Iron Maiden several months later, not so much, but initially, Vinnie certainly had his issues with Mark out of the gate.
Can you expound upon some of those issues, or?
Sure. And again, this is baggage that I'll open up on the table here because it's been open. Mark's talked about it. It's no secret that sometimes the way Vinnie would choose to critique was not always with the most delicate hand, and I don't think it was intentional. This is something that I experienced with him in the studio, where he would just, I'd hear him very calmly say during a drum track, or I'd hear the intercom, "Yeah, Bobby, it's sounding very amateur right now. I need for you to groove better. I need this thing to sound more professional." This kind of language,
Wow.
that gets into a young guy's head.
Sure.
Oh shit, it's not an amateur, and it wasn't. It was just kind of his personality. He didn't really think, okay, the way I tell this guy as a producer, here's how you get the most out of your players. Like Dana Strum really understood that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes Dana Strum would even say, "Hey Bobby, one more time for me. I fucked up the punch." Maybe he didn't. Maybe I fucked something up. But that's the kind of thing that Dana would do sometimes just to keep my confidence up. So likewise, when we were on the road, like I'll never forget, man. I think it was Lafayette, Louisiana, Alice Cooper tour. We're about to jump on stage at an arena. We're in this little holding room, about to walk out and play. And right there, we're all, Vinny's got his guitar around his neck. We're all in the little, Dana has his bass. We're sitting there about to go, minutes away from going out to play. Mark, I've been meaning to tell you, man, you've really been singing like shit lately. If you want to sing on this next record, you need to get your shit together. Just, emotion, not angry, just that this is how he delivered his critique to Mark.
Yeah.
So now you got a 21-year-old kid that has to jump on an arena full of rivet heads and deliver a decent vocal performance with that on his brain there, And as Mark describes it, it kind of made him fight. It kind of gave him that, oh yeah, motherfucker, I'll show you kind of thing. And so that's how he used it to fuel his thing. The biggest problem that I saw with it was that there was no real direction. Like, hey, Mark, listen, I feel like you're pulling sharp a little bit. You need to sing more from your chest and your throat. Take your time, or watch your phrasing. There wasn't anything really constructive about the criticism. Just, you're sounding like shit lately. Get your shit together.
Yeah.
It's you can't really get any direction from that,
No.
Yeah, and looking at it from an outsider, I mean that's an advantage that Vinnie and everybody else doesn't have. It kind of goes back to that same question, and I know the answer to this one, but it's like that same question of, is this his first opportunity to be the man?
Right.
It's given direction, and it's put it in the professional, well, not the professional world, professional in the business world. Okay, like I manage. Well, I'm not going to get into what I manage, but anyway, when I wasn't a manager, when I was a plumber working for guys that do what I do now, I developed my management style by seeing a lot of stuff that wasn't being done right and going, I'm not doing that. Right. I'm not treating my guys like this. I'm not gonna, my wife had a manager that never ever could say anything in the way of a positive motivation. Everything was negative motivation. And, the unfortunate thing is nobody succeeds like that. Vinnie wasn't in that position for his management. He was there for his musicianship.
Right.
And it's unfortunate that there was that kind of conflict like that, because you're right. There's no telling somebody something sounds amateurish. That's some amateurish management, in my opinion.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
you know,
right.
it's unfortunate that you guys had to deal with it, you know, and like I say, obviously Dana understood how to motivate people and, you know, how to get the most out of people like that by telling you stuff, you know, like, hey, I messed that up. And it's unfortunate that Mark, you know, had to take that. And it does sound like he was able to put in a positive light, but,
Yeah,
you know, and I don't know. It's, you know, it's just a shame that kind of stuff was going on.
Right, and I have to emphasize on both cases, I don't feel like Vinny was doing it as any kind of like a power trip or to be
I don't think he was
maliciously at all. I don't think it's. I think this is how he felt, and so he just said it. So I don't. I never. I want to make sure that I'm not like vilifying the guy because, you know, it's his band. Truthfully, he can really say and do whatever he wants.
Sure.
But you make an interesting point in that. I got the impression that this was the kind of shit that you know he was getting from Gene and Paul at times. You know.
Yeah.
So. You know, you would
perhaps
probably
somewhat also just not having experience. You know, I will tell you this again, looking at it from outside, if he could have had somebody else that was close to him advising him on how to interact with you guys, that band probably would have gone on a lot longer.
Right.
So
that's the big if, you know, and if you would have listened to that, that's the other thing. It's complicated, but I know exactly what you're saying, you know.
Yeah. So where did it start to unravel, or am I jumping in too quick with that, Jason? Am I too far?
Well, I mean, we didn't talk about the recording of All Systems Go. So you finish the tour here for the first album, and then you're going to ramp up and do the next album. I mean, was it a given that Mark was going to sing on it at that point, or was Vinnie wanting someone else, or?
Right. There was never beyond. For some reason, those comments that Vinnie made to Mark, I only recall during the Alice Cooper portion of the tour, which was the first few months. Once we hit Iron Maiden in January of '87, I don't recall it being an issue. I don't recall those kind of conversations happening anymore. We seemed to be in a nice little groove at that point. So we finished up the Maiden tour. We had several months off. Vinnie had to write that entire record from scratch, which was remarkable, man.
Right.
That amount of material in that short period of time, he really delivered the goods. When we all reconvened in LA to start working on the record, I personally was a little nervous about that with the Mark Slaughter thing, because I knew what I went through on the first record, and I was like, man, if he's had issues with Mark's vocals live under the microscope at the studio, we could be in trouble here, man.
Right.
And so the turning point in my mind was, before we did any kind of rehearsal, before we did anything, we all just got there. And, Vinnie had like a 12-track studio or something like that set up at his house where he'd been demoing the tunes. He wanted Mark to come over to his house so he could record vocals on the tunes, either because he wanted to point a reference or he needed to give the label something so they could hear what he's been working on. For whatever reason, that was it. I don't recall Mark being trepidatious about it, but I damn sure was. And I was thinking like, oh, shit, man, this is where it's going to come off the rails. Vinnie's going to hear it and sing in the studio. He's not going to dig it. We're going to go through this big thing. But by this point, Mark Slaughter was the lead vocalist. He had just done. Sorry, man. We just done. In fact, let me kill this bitch right now so we don't get any other calls. Airplane mode. There we go. So. Everybody knew Mark Slaughter as we did countless photo sessions. He did the video that he'd been on the tour. Mark Slaughter was the lead vocalist in the discussion. So to go through another change of vocals would have been catastrophic at that point. So I'll never forget, man. He drives over to Vinnie's house. He comes back later that day. Cool, man. How'd it go? Great. Stuff sounds great. No issue. It was a casual day. They recorded a couple tracks. They had some lunch. Mark was back at the apartment before traffic hour, and that's the way it went down that week. No issues about Mark singing then, and once we got in, so and even after the recording process was the 180 degrees different. Me and Dana tracked live together.
Good.
More of a traditional way. We went to Cherokee Studios and did all the guitar overdubs. So by the time Mark was going to do vocals there, certainly Vinnie was meticulous about how he wanted shit sang and all that, but there was never any issue on that record about Mark's abilities or Mark not liking it. In fact, I just saw a video yesterday that somebody sent me, as a matter of fact. It was some rare footage from way back then. In fact, dig this shit, man. I know this is probably, I don't know if this is going to come across, but I just thought this was remarkable. This is going to be very ghetto, but see if it comes across. This is Vinnie Vincent being interviewed about this is a quick excerpt from that interview.
Mark Slaughter, our singer, sounds absolutely incredible. He sounds like a young Robert Plant.
Mark Slaughter, our singer,
sounds like a young Robert Plant.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I would say he was happy. I would say he was happy with Mark's vocal performance on All Systems Go.
He was putting on a hell of an acting, either that or he was really acting. But yeah, he sounds like he really was into it.
He was. Look at, man, whenever I hear, Vinnie, like we all heard what Vinnie said when he first came back and all that, listen, I believe that Vinnie believes that. I don't think Vinnie's saying like, well, I really kind of like the kid, but I better say no. I think Vinnie, through a 30-year retrospective lens, believed in his mind that he never wanted Mark to be in the band and never was happy with him and did all the thing. From my perspective, we never, first of all, I've never known Vinnie Vincent to tolerate anything that he wasn't happy about for more than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Let alone a year and a half or whatever it was. I just never known him to put up with anything. If he was unhappy if he was unhappy with Mark's vocals on that first demo recording that he did for the All Systems Go, we would have heard about it, man. I don't feel like the guy was capable of like just keeping on airs about, okay, well, I'm not really happy, but I'm going to wear a smiley face here.
Right.
I believe that he always preferred Robert Fleischman, and that maybe would have been other vocals on it. But as far as him being unhappy with Mark Slaughter, that we never had even a remote clue about that. If I'm just being honest, in all of our recollection of how he did it, he seemed very happy with Mark then, and those issues live never resurfaced. And at the time, you just heard what he said. Sounded like a young. I don't think he was saying that for the. I think he really believed that. Wow, this guy's just sang his balls off on this record, and he did. That if you really isolate and listen to the vocals on All Systems Go, Mark Slaughter fucking annihilated it, man. He really his pipes, his different ranges, that Klaus Meine mid-range kind of thing he was doing. But then the shit up there and like Glenn Hughes and Ian Gilliland, I mean, it was really a tremendous showcase for just the raw talent that Mark Slaughter has as a vocalist,
From a personal point of view, Mark Slaughter is one of my probably top 3 favorite vocalists of all time. Everything he did in Slaughter and his solo stuff is, I love Mark. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Huge fan. So.
Right on.
So you get out on the tour for All Systems Go. I think now, Tom, is the time to ask. When do things start to unravel?
Yep.
Right. It started to unravel actually just before the tour.
Huh.
And what happened was, the first record didn't do what everybody thought it should have done. Everybody thought it was going to be a platinum selling record. Now, on the one hand, because of the issue where Robert sang on it, but Mark was the vocalist, is pretty well documented now. When we did the Boys Are Gonna Rock video, Mark is lip syncing to Robert's parts.
Right.
Nobody thought to contact Robert Fleischman and negotiate licensing or permission for this guy to lip sync to his vocal parts.
Oh.
So as soon as Robert saw that on MTV, he's like, "What the fuck?"
I bet.
Who is this poser in pumps singing my parts over here, So he gets his attorney on the phone, and a settlement was reached, and that was it. We could no longer do, we couldn't go a second single deep into the record, even though I think No Substitute, which should have done really well at radio, was kind of given a token release, but there was never a video for it. It happened around the Iron Maiden tour. And the whole thing, we had no choice but to go in and do another record, basically.
That's fascinating because I didn't realize that was why there were no other videos from
Right.
that record. That's really interesting information.
Right.
So well, I mean, maybe they didn't make you aware of it, but why would they not? I mean, you clearly want the band in the video, but could y'all have somehow released it without showing Mark singing something? I guess it'd be tough.
When you think about it, that is the workaround to do. I guess the reason it never came up is because back then, that you would so rarely see that kind of thing.
Yeah.
This is still the early days of MTV, so it was always very performance driven. You saw
Yeah,
the guys
yeah,
playing,
yeah.
you saw the guys sing. So I don't know that option ever really came up, although that would have been a better alternative, I think, than to not doing anything.
Yeah.
Like what we wind up doing, But beyond that, there's always a lot of, he said, she said, finger pointing, oh, the label, and, from our vantage point, everybody tries to find their reasons for why the thing didn't work. So we thought, okay, Chrysalis Records is not really a hard rock record. They had Billy Idol, Huey Lewis.
That's true.
So, they fucked things up, or our manager, George Sewitt, he was actually road manager. He was a well-known road manager in the industry, Billy Idol and Kiss. That's how he knew Vinnie. And now this is kind of like his first go-round as a big-time manager or whatever. Okay, George is inexperienced. George should have done A, B, and C. That kind of. This is what bands do. This is what, Now, likewise, the label and George are pointing fingers back at us. And, the record wasn't radio-friendly with all those heavy-duty guitars and the high-end vocals. Radio doesn't want to play it, blah, blah. So they had all of their reasons. And, of course, one of the prevailing things that continued to come up was to what extent Vinnie himself might have somehow been a liability to his own band. Now, this wasn't us just making it. This was something that, because at the time, we were doing maybe a 40, 45-minute set, and about 10 minutes of it was Vinnie on stage by himself doing these crazy, type solos and all that, And there would be other things, the way Vinnie maybe handled media people, fans, whatever. There were, if you wanted to assign blame to Vinnie Vincent on some level, there were probably things you could find to do. Now, whether he was actually a liability is a subjective call that no one will ever really know for sure, but this was the word. This was word around the campfire between management, label, band. It's just the way it was, And so, with that in mind, we ended up parting ways with George Sewitt. Throughout the recording of All Systems Go, George had little direct involvement with us. There was some bad blood, some different things happened, and eventually we parted ways with George and began to interview other managers. On some of these key meetings, if it looked like we may be having a second or third meeting with the management person, we were getting close to maybe signing with somebody, Dana Strum would pull the person aside and say, listen, I just want to let you know that we've had some, that we have a few issues with Vinnie. I just want you to know about it. These are some of the things Vinnie does. These are some of the things that we felt might be an issue. He was basically giving the new guy a heads up on some of the ways to navigate. And I should also point out that Dana Strum always had like a crazy, serious, hands-on role in all aspects of the band business. Always did from day one. He's very hands-on. George Sewitt, our manager, was always in New York. We're all in LA, so Dana was always on the phone, always doing stuff, always talking to George, talking to the agent, talking to the label, talking to our endorsement people, whatever it was. This was part of his nature, so it wasn't unusual for him to step up and take this role with a potential new manager. So he was kind of forewarning these guys, and even going as far as to say, and listen, man, we're all in it for the long haul. We want to see things go smoothly for the second record here. However, if Vinnie's self-sabotage mechanism is in full force here, we are all prepared as a band to move on without Vinnie. We'll get another guitar player in here, and we will be a double platinum. We will be a multi-platinum band on our own. So just letting you know, we're not planning on that. We're not anticipating that, but this is some information, some like an FYI type thing,
Right.
So what happened is one of these guys that Dana talked to about that goes to Vinnie and says, I got to tell you, man, your guys are talking shit behind your back here. They're talking about kicking you out of the band, or he put it in a way that was even exaggerated from what Strum told him, And so that led to a big blow up that, so immediately, Vinnie confronted us about it. I remember the moment when that happened, and of course we did, oh, that's bullshit. We didn't say that. He must have. We had to kind of backpedal and all that. But from that moment forward, Vinnie couldn't prove it. We said the guy completely misread or misunderstood what Dana said or whatever. But from that moment forward, that's when shit began to unravel. So
trust is gone then.
It really kind of was, because Vinnie couldn't prove it, but he was suspicious about it.
Sure.
So that was like the first big step. Now, the guy we ended up hiring, this guy from England named Nigel, it turned out that he stepped in and was basically Vinnie Vincent's manager. He wasn't really the band manager per se. So that was another wedge.
Yeah.
They're negotiating for the tour. Now this guy's negotiating on behalf of his client, Vinnie Vincent, and you guys are to be paid market value for your services. Like, market value, we all fucking have a piece of the pie here. We know it's Vinnie's thing, it's his band, it's his songs, but this has been, we have proceeded with in good faith that this is like a band vibe here. You know, we all have a little piece of equity. We all, you know, and so this guy kind of stepped in for his own financial reasons or whatever, and kind of, you know, redistributed, you know, the power structure, if you will. And so that was another. So we had issues with Vinnie, issues with the manager, the tour manager guy who was hired was also kind of brought in to be like Vinnie's boy, so to speak. So that created other conflicts. And the final nail in the coffin, and I talk about this scene in the book in great detail because it was the defining moment, is when I finally said, you know what, man, you know, in my naive way, I'm gonna have a heart-to-heart with Vinnie. I'm gonna tell him the truth, man. You know, so we're like 2 weeks into the tour, if that. I see Vinnie poolside at one of the hotels we're at. He's got his Walkman, you know, on with the cassette, you know. But he looks depressed. You can tell he's upset. He knows something's up with the band, but he can't prove it. So I have a seat with Vinnie, and I have a heart-to-heart with him. I go, okay, listen, man. Once I confirmed that this is what he was upset about, I said, look, yes, it's true. There were some conversations like that. But listen, it was never, you know, and I tried to be as honest and transparent as I could about what happened, about why it happened, about how none of us were planning a mutiny, that, you know, all of that. And probably, you know, 2 minutes into that explanation, bang, like the axe hit the fucking tree, man. I could just see in that moment, you know. He just said, I knew it. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, wait. This is not the reaction, you know. Right. We're supposed to hug it out now. We're supposed to have a powwow, go out and have some pasta and talk this shit through, and move beyond it and continue on and get through this tour and do another, and all that. But at that moment, bang, it was over. It was never to be recovered. And from that point forward, the biggest wedge was between Vinnie and Dana, actually, because I think Vinnie saw Dana as the primary conspirator behind this whole thing. So the rest of that tour was fucking hell. With all my good intentions, it was the wrong thing to do. It was unfair to do for Mark and Dana, because we all had to suffer through the remaining weeks of the tour with how things were then handled and done, and taking hotel rooms away from us. Now the three of us got to try to share 2 rooms, and like all petty shit. I mean, it is like, poor guys or whatever, but I mean, just all this petty shit started happening. Paychecks arriving late, right? You know, so by the end of the tour, there's a big deficit of money we were owed. I mean, it was a clusterfuck, and it was because, you know, Vinnie, for whatever reason, he chose to have a very emotional reaction and response to what I told him, you know. And, you know, I should have just let it ride out, and we would have had a whole different, I mean, I don't know that the band would have continued beyond that record.
You know, man's got such a paranoid streak about his personality that, you know, I think once the seed was there was probably never any recovering at that point.
Right. Again, my opinion or perspective on Vinnie has always been that, you know, he is like the classic artiste. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
the classic,
I get it. I get that.
Creative guy. And say that he's a creative genius, I don't think is an exaggeration, man. He's a brilliant songwriter. He's a guitar player without parallel, and he has all the attributes of like the classic artistic type person. Mm-hmm. Now, if somebody's is way to the right, meaning way right brain,
that's right,
in how they are, they should not have any involvement, in my opinion, in left brain business kind of stuff. That's what managers are for. Right, and in our case, that's what Dana Strum was for.
Right.
Real man, Dana Strum and Vinnie Vincent, man, were like peanut butter and jelly in this thing. I mean, the role that Dana played, not only creatively as co-producer, and all the input that most people don't really know about, all the ways that he took all of Vinnie's writing and songs and parts and guitar stuff and all that to the next level. Dana had a crazy work ethic. First one to the studio, last one to leave, and in pre-production and during the recording process, how he guided, you know, not just Vinnie's playing with his soloing and all that and punch shit and all that, but how he influenced parts, how he influenced composition, all that, man. There's no getting around his influence there. But beyond that, from a business perspective, Dana knew how to navigate the waters with Vinnie on board. Vinnie, Dana knew, what to tell Vinnie about and what to hide from Vinnie. Now you may go, oh well, that was deceitful of Dana to not be more forthright or whatever. No, it was just the way it had to go down. And so not only did Vinnie have someone who could handle all the left brain stuff and gladly be on the phone and gladly take care of that, so Vinnie could kind of sort of coexist in his own creative bubble, but he had somebody who knew enough, frankly, to be covert about how he did it.
Sure.
And that's the crazy irony about that. And for anyone who takes the argument, oh no, that honesty is the best policy and Dana should have just been up front. All you got to do is just look at the guy's career, look at the activities of Vinnie Vincent before the invasion and after the invasion. During the invasion, when Dana was on board, we had 3 years of Vinnie Vincent functioning as in a professional rock band, recording and completing albums, recording and completing videos, completing tours. It was a pretty well-run machine during those 3 years. Prior to that and after that, I'm not saying that it had to be Dana Strum in particular, but I mean, just observe, observe what happened. And so that speaks to my point that, again, this isn't a criticism towards Vinnie. It's just pointing out that if Vinnie, especially back then, I can't speak to present day so much, but, this is the kind of thing that happened. When left to his own devices, he's going to make decisions that come across very erratically because they're purely emotionally based. And that's what happened when we had our little powwow there. There was no, hey, you know what, guys, let's talk about this shit. What do you mean liability? None of that. Just bang. And at that point, there was no going back. There was no discussion when he settled down a week later. That was it. And so that kind of tells you a little bit of the inside scoop of, what I call the VVI power matrix, how the shit how it all went down,
Well, I mean, that's super insightful, Bobby, because, you're absolutely right. That's, and let's kind of go towards the KISS area of things. It is extremely unusual for somebody to be super artistic and super analytical. Just crazy rare. And you get somebody like Gene Simmons, he's got both. He is one of the singular anomalies that we have out there. Gene Simmons, Dana Strum, and I'm sure there's we know other guys who kind of assume that role in the band as like the band leader type guy who have the capacity to do both. But man, these are rare folks. They are, and then like you say, when it's unfortunate that some of these other guys, it's like the best baseball player doesn't necessarily become a great manager. Probably isn't going to be a great manager.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So that's all unfortunate. And what's really ironic about all this, we had a chance to talk to Mark on one of our podcasts, and he talked to us about the contract,
right?
About how the contract flipped. And I got to tell you, man, I was just fascinated. I deal with contracts all the time, most of them real estate related, and I was just amazed at how that contract was structured. That the record label did what they did. You want to share that?
Are you talking about Mark's leaving member option?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was actually kind of commonplace back then, where, let's say you had a band where there was one guy who's primarily signed to the label, like Vinnie Vincent's a classic example. So now Vinnie hires these other guys to come in the band, singer, bass player, drummer. What they would do is they would make the other members who were not part of the original record contract sign what's known as a leaving member option. And basically what this ensures is that if anything happens to any of us, if we get fired, if we quit, what have you, while the band's still going on, Chrysalis has what the record company has what's known as the first right of refusal. So you get somebody like Mark Slaughter, so they're pumping all this money into the Vinnie Vincent Invasion, and by direct association, Mark Slaughter. He's the singer. He's in all the magazines. He's in the video. He's known as the band's lead vocalist. What this prevents is Mark being able to jump ship 2-3 years down the road and jump over to Mercury or another label or something like that, and have them benefit from all of the investment of time and money and energy into essentially the propagation of Mark's career. exposure and so forth. So by signing the leaving member option, it ensures that if any of us split or if the band breaks or whatever, they have a chance to essentially offer us a record deal first.
Right.
And this usually goes for the singer. Let's be honest. You know, they're not going to pick up a drummer or bass player's option in most cases. So that's exactly what happened. And you know, I'm still unclear during that summer when the decision was made. But it was because Chrysalis was kind of they didn't have direct day-to-day involvement with us. They weren't privy to a lot of the shit that was going on. There wasn't anybody in our camp that was necessarily probably. I mean, I'm sure Strum was probably talking to some of our folks over there, but. Somewhere along the way, for what maybe they heard that the shit was going to implode, whatever it was, during the tour, a decision was made to pick up Mark's option, and I presume, you know, to not re-sign Vinnie or not pick up Vinnie's third record option.
That's the way Mark explained.
Yeah,
that's exactly how
because all you got to do is watch Love Kills. You know, when we all saw that video for the first time. You know, the way the thing is edited, it's, you know, Mark Slaughter, Mark Slaughter, Mark Slaughter. And, of course, when it finally hit the airwaves on the bumper there, it says Vinnie Vincent Invasion featuring Mark Slaughter.
Right.
It was that Nightmare on Elm Street soundtrack thing and all that, you know. Clearly, their motive was to use the last Vinnie Vincent Invasion, you know, their last big chunk of money at a video to promote the thing they were going to do next. Now I can't say for sure. I never understood. I never knew for sure if, you know, what the deal was. You know, if they just didn't renew Vinnie's thing, if they didn't pick up his option. I don't know what exactly happened there. But when you say that the deal kind of flipped, what it looked like was that they essentially got what was going to be Vinnie's third record deal and essentially gave it to Mark. That's the perception. Mm-hmm. What I imagine happened is probably two independent things that happened simultaneously. We're not going to pick up Vinnie's option. We're going to pick up Mark's option instead.
That makes sense.
And then what happened? And then I think that gave people the perception that you know, Vinnie was kicked out of his own band, all that. And I don't think that's necessarily true. It's semantics. It depends how you look at it. It was just. We're not going to go this direction. The reason I personally don't think that they were intending to pick up Vinnie's option is because why would they? Because I think they wanted to use Love Kills and everything they were doing to promote the next thing that they were going to do with Vinnie Vincent. But by sort of gearing it all towards the promotion of Mark Slaughter, that kind of gives you the telltale sign that, you know what, we're not going to continue on with Vinnie, but instead we're going to do this new thing with Mark.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense.
So I'm curious, and maybe I've missed this over the years, but you know, your era of music and bands that's what I listen to. One thing I've never known or heard talked about, and I'm sure it has been, is why you didn't move on with Dana and Mark as the drummer in Slaughter. Do you mind talking about that?
Not at all. Not at all. That was a tough decision, man. That was a really difficult decision, and I think it got down to a couple different things. I mean, it was presumed I would. You know, my relationship with Mark and Dana was always good, always strong throughout. The one thing I'll point out, though, is that for the majority of the tour, as I mentioned, one of the hotel rooms was taken away. You know, we got to save money, so you three guys got to figure out who's going to split these two rooms, kind of thing. The way it kind of wound up is, you know, Mark and Dana wound up doing kind of a brothers in arms thing. So they would take the double, I would take a single, and of course Vinnie would take a single, and that is symbolic of sort of the three, what I call the three camps, as it was, because my position was to be neutral. Let's just get through this. I don't know what the fuck I'm going to do next. Meanwhile, Dane and Mark were clear, man, that the first show of the tour, I'll never forget it, man. It was July 4th weekend, Summerfest in Milwaukee. They've had this ongoing festival for years and years, still goes on to this day. We were playing it. Dana, before soundcheck, we were sitting out on the park ground someplace at a park bench, and Dana described to me the record that we would go on to do. And he described it sort of like a Def Leppard type thing. And we'd have these hooky songs with the big drum sound and a polished thing. He essentially described the first Slaughter record exactly at that point. So they were very clear on what was going to happen when it was over. I wasn't ready to make that decision, so I was part of the. I was one of three camps that just kind of got through the tour. When we got to the end of it, I said, guys, I probably stick around and do this thing. I love to play with you guys, keep it going. I just need some breathing room, basically. So I took a few days off. I drove north on the 101 here out of Los Angeles to Santa Barbara, stayed beachfront for a few days, just did nothing, basically. Just contemplated and thought about it, took some walks and all that. And I think for me it got down to two things. Now, number one was, remember when I first sort of went full circle back into the hard rock thing, I was kind of on a path of doing the drummer's drummer trip and all that. That was still kind of an unfulfilled thing. And at that point in 1988, fall of 88, drumming instructional videos were just starting to come out. Right. And I really felt a calling to go down that road. Now, I know you could say, well, why don't you play with Mark and Dana and then just do a drum video? What the hell? But it became this thing where I felt like I wanted to make it a more dedicated pursuit. I knew I'd play with other people, but I had an idea for my first book that I wrote was around that. It was a method book that was kind of tied in with this drum video thing, and I wanted to do something really different. And so creatively speaking, I just felt like I needed to take a little detour. Mm-hmm. And the other side of it was, it was such a mental clusterfuck getting through that All Systems Go tour. The emotional, the PSD type shit, I like to say, that we all dealt with there. I just felt like, I need to create some distance. I need to create some space between all camps here, man, and make a nice clean break. I don't know what I'm going to do. I didn't have anything lined up. I didn't have any other gig. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I just felt like I needed to kind of go down that road, and it was a tough conversation to have. I talked to the guys. They were great about it. They were cool. We remained on great terms all through the years and all of that. The other thing I must admit, and I think I mentioned this in the book as well, is I had no idea that their record was going to do what it did.
Of course, yeah.
I got to just be honest. I mean, if I could have looked at a crystal ball and saw like a double platinum thing, then I probably would have had a whole different like philosophical slant on what I did. Sure. Because at that point, I mean, I knew Mark was a world-class singer, Dana was a world-class producer, but I hadn't heard any shit that they had. I don't even know if they started writing songs yet. I didn't know what it was going to be. We hadn't had a lot of luck with Chrysalis. So I thought, you know what, man, this thing is probably going to be a decent record, but with Chrysalis and without the Vinnie Vincent name and all that, it's probably going to be one of these records that sells 150,000 copies. That's like the cool record that never got a shot or whatever, And of course, they wrote some monster fucking songs. Right. And at that point, there was this a seismic shift that happened at Chrysalis, where a lot of the folks that we were working with there had moved on to other things. They got some more rock and roll people in there. So by the time Chrysalis was ready to launch the Slaughter record, it was a whole other roster over there. That's just kind of like how it is in the industry. The person who signs you gets fired, and this other. So they had, and Mark told me, he goes, Bobby, you wouldn't believe what it's like at once they were working on the new record. I was in touch with the guys, and Mark told me, man, when we go over to Chrysalis, it's a whole different vibe there. You wouldn't believe it. They got these people. They really got the shit together now. And so they had the benefits of all those as well. But they made a great record. There's no question about it. They wrote some great songs. And I didn't really have a clue about that, if I'm being honest.
Right.
They're going to have that kind of a record.
But you did a bunch of work in between that 88 and the 90. Yep. You played on that first Nitro record. I mean, there was lots of stuff going on. You were super, the video and all that stuff. You were super busy, so you were probably, hey, I've got stuff going on here. Yep. Why do I need, to continue on with this possible, who knows what's going to happen here,
Right. Well, now to be clear, when I made the decision, I didn't really have jack shit. I mean, I was kind of stepping off into the vortex. But yes, you're absolutely right. As a couple months went by, there was the Bob Kulick record, right. Skull record, the Nitro thing, other sessions, other things I was doing. I just worked with this band called Brunette, who later became Hardline with Neil Schon.
Yeah, great band.
I kind of was supposed to wind up in that, I think, early on, but I was by that point with the Nelson Brothers. And the Nelson thing was like 6 months later.
That was going to be I was going to ask about the Nelson thing, because I'm a huge fan of the After the Rain record. Love that record. You're playing on it. It's phenomenal. Those songs, I mean, it's a great record, and I was going to ask you about, how that came about.
Yeah, that was a solid 6 months after the fact. A lot of times, I think the perception back then was, Bobby had the choice between do I stay with Slaughter or do I go with the Nelson Brothers? I'll choose the Nelson Brothers. That's not how it went down. Right. It was a completely different thing. It was a solid 6 months later, and it was just I I don't know, man. It was just, it was meant to be. That's the only way to describe it. You know, I was actually with Bob Kulick and the guys. We've been working on the record, and we went to go see this band called Lion. It was Doug Aldridge's. It was a band that was really well known in LA, never really popped. So we went to go see Lion at at the Roxy, and so I'm there, and who's our boy Gene from Lizzie Borden, the guitar player, Gene Allen from Lizzie Borden comes up to me there. Hey, Bobby, man, you know, the Nelson Brothers are looking for a drummer. They got a big record deal and all that. I'm like, and I'd met the Nelson Brothers like a year prior when I was with Vinnie Vincent at the MTV Music Awards, and I saw them there. You know, the twin brothers. I thought, and I heard that they had, you know, they could sing, and I go, somebody's gonna make a lot of money off of those guys, man. Right. Just how can you not, you know? And I knew them. We were friendly or whatever. So Gene says, yeah, Bobby, you should check that gig out. I go, well, sounds interesting. Do you have a phone number? Well, you don't need a phone number. They're here right now. So I think it was Matthew that I ended up talking to, and it was like, hey, oh yeah, bro, they remember me from Vinny and all that. Oh yeah, you should check it out, man. We got this great deal with Geffen and blah, 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 blah. So later that week, I met with the brothers. They played me their stuff, and it just, there was never an audition. We never even played together initially. It was just, I just kind of, I go, yeah, I'll do it. And that was it. I just kind of fell into the band. They hired the other guys. It just was the most natural, organic kind of transition. You know, I had my trepidations initially about the gig because obviously it was notably more popish than what I was doing. Even the demos had that. But I go, man, these are really well written songs. These guys sing their balls off. They do the harmony. They do all that shit. They came. Their thing was they came from more of like an acoustic singer songwriter background. You know, the people don't know their dad. He was known as a pop star or whatever, but he was really a big innovator. Ricky Nelson with California Sound and the Eagles style backgrounds and all that shit. He was actually a legitimate guy above and beyond what he did in the pop world with the TV show and all that. And so that's kind of like the school they came from, you know. Now, unfortunately, we were kind of thrown into the metal edge crowd, you know, when we really we were in a weird position, man. We were too heavy to be like in the New Kids on the Block boy band thing, although we were in a lot of those same magazines, that 16 magazine and all that shit. But then we weren't necessarily heavy enough, like, you know, as even a Warrant or a Slaughter or a Whitesnake or what. So we were kind of in this weird limbo land there, you know. But it was a hell of a ride, a great gig, and a lot of good times in that thing.
Yeah, it's a great record, and I absolutely love it. And catch a lot of flack for it because, you know, that was the thing, you know.
I catch a lot of flack for it.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, man, because I wish people would just listen to the record because, I mean, the non-single track, even though the single tracks were brilliant. You know, Will You Love Me, the last track on that record?
Right, yeah.
Best song on the record, in my opinion. Absolutely incredible song, you know, and I love that record, so I don't care what anybody says.
One other quick thing I just wanted to mention that, again, is not commonly known and probably wouldn't be known unless you happen to see the band live, is that, you know, I mean, I had agreed to do it, but as I mentioned, but I kind of had my, is this going to, you know, something told me, man, coming from that Vinnie Vincent Invasion background and doing the heavy hitting stuff, this could backfire on me doing this gig. So at the time they had a manager, Jeffrey Shoecraft, an Australian manager. This was the concept. We sat down for breakfast one morning. I was with the brothers. I was with Jeffrey, and they gave me the vision. They said, listen, and again, back to the David Lee Roth analogy. What they wanted to do, you know, have the brothers front the thing, but put together like a monster band behind the brothers. That could really, because they wanted to have that showcase of the musicianship and all that shit. And they cited the first David Lee Roth record as an example. We wanted to put together like a powerhouse band of these kind of players and all that. So I'm like, cool, I'm all about that shit. And they got this guy, Brett Garsed, an Australian-based guitarist, one of the baddest motherfuckers ever, to come in and play guitar. Paul Merkovich, a keyboard player who's gone on to, I think he plays the Voice. He's a musical.
He's the music director for The Voice, and
he's done everything, man. Cher, all these different gigs, tours, records, you know, phenomenal talent. And that was later on they got Joey Cathcart as a guitarist and vocals as well. But initially that was like us three guys behind them was the core band. And I'm like, wow, man, we're gonna fucking clean house out there, man. You know, and so when it came time to tour, we had trouble finding the right bill to get on. People didn't want to have us out, whatever it was. So we ended up headlining, and we started like doing theaters. But the point is, we were headlining off of one record. you got to do a 75-minute set. We did, so everybody got like an extended solo.
Right.
I was doing like 10-minute drum solos on this thing. Guitar player Brett, Paul, we each had this showcase moment. So anybody who ever saw the thing live, across the board, God damn, I had no idea it was going to be like this, man. This is really a phenomenal band. And the brothers, they actually do what they do extremely well, man. This is before the unplugged phenomenon really started happening, but right around the Milli Vanilli thing. So what brothers would do is they would take their acoustic guitars everywhere when they go to like a radio station visit or a promotional thing. They were always doing like these acoustic sets, actually as a way, I think, to sort of say, hey, listen, we really play, we really sing. Instead of we're not, because the Milli Vanilli thing was like a big pop culture thing was going on. Oh, here's the new Milli Vanilli with the Nelson band and all that. So they would make it, and sure enough, man, they sang their fucking asses off. Their pitch, their harmonies, and as players, they always were very pro. They did their shit very well. And as a band, it was very impactful to see that kind of show. So, but the problem is that most people, in mass didn't catch the band live. And what wound up happening on the record and coming across in the videos, and of course when the label sees a certain thing, like, oh wow, we're appealing to 11-year-old girls, then all the marketing and everything kind of gets pushed more in that direction. And so therefore I think it was kind of branded in a way that was very different than what we had expected or hoped.
So why did they? This is also something I've never known. Why did they choose to go? I mean, obviously the second record that they did was very singer-songwriter, more acoustic-oriented kind of stuff. Because they can, I think it's what it's called. Why did they not decide to stay with, the formula of the first album and the band of the first album? Why that drastic change?
Well, two reasons. Number one, the Seattle thing happened.
Sure.
Everything shifted there.
Yeah. Everything
shifted. Now, let's see, we got off the road late 91. We started working on the new record in 92. So in my opinion, that the first suspect decision, if you will, was that, perhaps due to a lot of the backlash for whatever it was, the brothers decided to go in a whole different direction for the second record.
Yeah.
That was nothing like Because They Can, by the way. It was a record called Imaginator, which came out later.
Yeah, I have it
in a whole different form.
Yeah.
But the Imaginator that came out was very different than the one we recorded. The one we recorded was like a concept record. They got fucking Henry Rollins to come in and do voiceover stuff. There's like this whole concept about how television is infiltrating the minds of the young, like this whole deep conceptual vibe. The music was kicking. There was like some instrumental shit. I mean, it was like the fucking Elder, if you want to draw a comparison to what that vibe. I've actually never heard all that record, but I mean, as I understand it, the Elder was like the radical, sophisticated departure that ultimately people didn't necessarily take about. But so the brothers are like, oh, we're gonna do this conceptual record. We're gonna have all the musicianship. We're gonna have this wide range of shit. We're bringing in fucking sitars and it was like this whole big thing. And what they did is they. And of course John Kalodner, big powerful A&R guy, he was our guy. He did Aerosmith, he did a bunch of other people. He wasn't happy about any of this, but they went over his head, and basically went to like the president of Geffen of the label, and essentially vetoed John Kalodner. So we all relocated to this residential studio in Reno, sequestered ourselves for 2 months in the studio, and recorded this masterpiece, and when it finally came time to let everybody at Geffen hear the record, it was fucfucking crickets in that room, man. It was like, what the fuck is this? Because precisely as you just said, they were looking for an After the Rain Part 2, even though, because the scene was just starting to shift. It hadn't completely shifted. I think the Nirvana album was out, but it hadn't really. If they would have released it then, there would have been a prayer that we could have maybe got the final back tail end of the scene before it went completely down the shitter. But no, instead they bring Kalodner back in. They got to do this big apology. There have been things said publicly, but it was like a whole PR nightmare. And now the ball was back in Kalodner's court. And Kolodner's whole trip, and now we're pushing 93. Now we're summer '92 recorded it. So it was, yeah, actually, you know what? It was probably early '93 by the time that they brought it to the label. So anyway, now Kolodner is going to call the shots. And at that point, to do an After the Rain would not make any sense. So his was like, you know what? His quote was, unless you guys become the Eagles of the '90s, your career is over. That was the way he saw it. He saw no pop rock thing again. He saw no chance of repeating what they had done, what we had done in '91. He wanted to go more like almost like a country rock direction, which of course is what that record largely was. You know, we had some other things in there, but it was that was the undertone. It was kind of an Eagles-y kind of vibe, and that was the All Shook Up and some of these other songs on there. Sure. And so that's what it was. So I wound up doing Imaginator, and that came out later in an altered version with different tracks on it. A couple things we did in Imaginator wound up on the second record, which was Because They Can. It was kind of a mishmash of intermingling of the sessions and the songs and all that. But that's, and ultimately it all kind of rode off into the sunset anyway, you know?
Right. That's fascinating. You know, I wish that would get a release somehow. You know, there's a lot of records that got shelved.
One, yeah.
Right, the original one, right? There's a lot of records during that time that were great, brilliant records. Like Danger recorded a record called Cockroach, you know, and it got shelved, and then the Seattle thing happened, and they had two different singers on it, and Ted Poley, and and then it finally came out later as a double album set with both versions of both singers, a lot of those kind of shelved records I wish would see the light of day, because there was really some amazing stuff written in the the early to mid 90s that because of what was shifting with the music scene we never got to hear, and that would be one record I would love to hear.
Sure.
So
right on.
What are you doing these days?
Lita Ford has been the main gig about 5.5 years now. It's been a blast. We got a great team. We got a kick-ass band. Marty O'Brien on bass, Patrick Henderson on guitar, along with Lita on guitar and vocals. It's a strong unit. Marty's been on board a little longer than I have, and Patrick's been on board a little less than I have. So we've done hundreds of shows together, and we got a good thing happening. Working with Lita Ford's been great. One of our few rock icons still out there, really kicking it. She goes back to the '70s, man, with what she does.
Yeah.
And that shit is old school cool, man. I mean, to be on stage with her and see her kind of carrying the torch for that thing, So it's great. It's a different day, different time, different era now to be touring. But there's a way to be out there doing it, and we're making the best of it. A lot of what we do. Occasionally we'll jump on a bus for short periods of time. Back in the old days, that's all you did. You got on the bus, you're gone for 6 to 9 months or longer. Nowadays, it's more fly dates. We're flying in and out of different markets, doing different kind of shows, different kinds of venues and all that. But we're having a ball out there, man, and crowds have been coming out. So keep that shit rolling,
Yeah.
And he's writing a book, don't forget.
That's right. Let's talk about where we can get the book, Tom.
Yeah.
You can get it at Rockologists.com. Jason will put the spelling of that because it's plural. And this is we're doing a Rockologist version of it. So Bobby's autographed all of them. We're going to put a hologram on them and put a matching certificate. So you won't have to worry about the autograph of it. Interesting read. Very interesting read.
Yeah.
Cool. And so when you guys do that, so basically you're offering something that's kind of for lack of a better definition, almost like a limited edition version of the book. Then when they get it from you, it's got a hologram. So that's super cool, man.
Yep. That's what we do. That's what we do. Yeah.
So
well, man, this has been just fascinating, Bobby. Just fascinating.
Cool.
It's to hear all the inside tracks on this, and again, you've been such a great guy. I've had people don't know this, but I had a chance to talk to Bobby quite a bit before he came out with this book.
Oh yeah.
Just like today, man, just talking, having a good time with it. And there was one thing I wanted to say. When people read this book, I think the first thing that caught my eye was that picture right there with your first band director,
Miss Thompson. There she is.
And where you're giving her credit. And I thought, man, that's Bobby right there. right there, because I just went right to it and remembered somebody that really impacted you greatly.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, teachers remain, man, the most underappreciated, certainly underpaid, vocation in our society, man. I just, I know people say, oh, I wouldn't be here without so-and-so. I wouldn't be. This is absolutely the truth here, man. And I've always known of her impact. I actually wrote a memoir. I published a memoir on my blog some years back, I believe on her 75th birthday, detailing our relationship and all the ways she impacted me. So I've known that. But when I actually sat down to write this book, and because it focuses, the first chapter or so focuses all on the early years, how I got interested in drumming, some of the things we talked about earlier, and then it picks up with the VVI stuff. But all of the most influential aspects, of how I got interested in drumming, and the initial, work ethic, the practicing, the reading music, my drum teacher, Randy May, going to Berkeley. This was all Miss Thompson, man. So I thought, I really need to dedicate the book to her. I got to point out, by the way, the reason I'm standing there with my band director and I don't have a shirt on, by the way, is I played with Lita Ford. She lives in New Braunfels, which is close to San Antonio. So we were playing in San Antonio, and she came out to the show. And it happened to be, normally, many times we play in cool venues, theaters where there's plenty of room. This was one of like a smaller rock club type of vibe. We love playing them, but it wasn't the greatest place to have guests. So she comes to the gig. I'm thinking, okay, she's gonna, at her age, we go on like at 11 o'clock or something. I go, okay, she'll stay for a few songs. I saw her before the show. I probably won't see her. During Close My Eyes Forever, which is always typically the second to the last song, I see her over there off the side that she's still at the gig. And so the beginning of it, of course, has all the acoustic stuff. It's Lita and Patrick singing. So I just, in the spot, she break from behind the drums. I just walked over to her, and I'm sweating my ass off, no shirt on, and for whatever reason, we just kind of had this spontaneous unfolding of a photo op. So I reluctantly put my arm around her with my sweaty ass, and somebody snapped a shot. I wound up with the shot, and I wish I had a better, but that was like the most current one, and so I guess I'm kind of rationalizing why in the fuck I have a shot with my band director and I don't have a shirt on,
I think it's a good shot, man. I mean, that's you as a performer. I mean, right. It is. It's actually pretty good. Now, if you were 15 and had your shirt off to get in the picture, we might have a different opinion of that. But
right.
Well, on a personal level, Bobby, I've really enjoyed this because, like I alluded to through our conversation here, and I've followed your career. I'm a big, not just Vinnie Vincent fan and huge Slaughter fan, and you being involved with Mark and Dana, but I was a huge fan of that Nelson record, and it's just been a real pleasure for me to chat about all this stuff with you, because I've loved everything you've been involved with. I love that first Nitro record. So
cool, thank you, brother. Thank you.
So I've always been a huge fan, man, and really, really, really appreciate you coming on and talking with us today and sharing your story, man.
My pleasure, man. It's been a ball. Yeah. Just got to mention one other thing real quick. I know Tom just kind of brushed it off as, we had a few conversations. Let me tell you something, man. I have my own publishing imprint, and I decided to go that direction with this book. And it wasn't just a couple casual conversations I had with Tom. I pestered this guy, man, because Tom is the man when it comes to just the knowledge of, putting books together, all that goes into it, the art and the science, if you will, of publishing something high quality and the best way to do it and the way that makes most sense financially for everyone and all those kind of things. So, man, I just want to say publicly, I appreciate all the callbacks and all the time you spent with my ass on the phone, educating me on the ways of modern publishing. Man, I appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, you're way too kind. I appreciate you too.
Right.
Well, let's go to the Rockologists.com and pick up Bobby's book signed with a hologram, and
check him out on the road with Lita Ford.
Check him out on the road with Lita Ford, and then for Tom and myself, we want to thank Bobby for coming on, and we'll see you on the next episode, folks.
Bye. Right on, guys.